Daniel had always been the kind of man people admired from afar. From the outside, it looked like he had the perfect life. He was young, handsome, and successful. He had built his business from scratch and turned it into something that newspapers loved to write about. He owned a beautiful home, the kind of mansion people only saw in magazines. When he drove down the street, people turned their heads because his car gleamed like a symbol of everything they wished they had. But Daniel had not always been this man. His story began with hardship. His father had passed away when he was only a boy, and his mother had raised him alone. She had worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs at once, just to make sure he had food, clothes, and a chance at school. There were times when she skipped meals so Daniel could eat. There were winters when she wore the same old coat, while Daniel had something new to keep him warm. She never complained. She only smiled and told him that life would get better if he worked hard and believed in himself. Her words became his guiding light. Daniel grew up determined to change his life not only for himself, but also for the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. When he finally made his way into the world of business, his mother was always his quiet strength. She was not the type to brag or demand recognition, but Daniel knew in his heart that everything he had achieved was because of her love. Now, at 32, Daniel stood on top of the world. He had built wealth that gave him every comfort he could imagine. But more than money, he had found love, or so he believed. Claire, the woman by his side, was beautiful, elegant, and charming. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone turn their heads. Daniel had fallen for her quickly, believing that she was the partner he had been waiting for all his life. They had been engaged for 6 months, and their wedding was already being planned. To Daniel, it felt like the final piece of his perfect life falling into place. He had a successful business, a home he could be proud of, and now he would soon marry the woman of his dreams. What else could a man ask for? But beneath the golden surface of his life, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. His mother had always been kind and polite to Claire, but Daniel could sense a quiet distance between them. His mother did not speak badly of her, but there was something unspoken in her eyes whenever Claire's name came up. Daniel brushed it aside, telling himself that perhaps his mother only needed time to adjust. After all, she had lived alone with him for many years. It was only natural that she might feel protective. Claire, on the other hand, seemed affectionate and warm whenever Daniel was around. She laughed at his mother's stories, offered to help her around the house, and even called her mom sometimes. To Daniel, it looked like everything was fine. He had no reason to doubt her. Love has a way of blinding people, and Daniel, in his happiness, chose to believe only what he wanted to see. Life went on in this picture-perfect way. Daniel often traveled for business, and during those times, Claire would stay at the house with his mother. He never questioned it. Why should he? He thought it was a chance for them to bond. But behind closed doors, the story was very different. His mother, gentle and quiet, endured things she never spoke of. She had always been the type of woman who believed in protecting her son's happiness, even at the cost of her own. She noticed the sharpness in Claire's tone when Daniel was not around, the impatience in her eyes and the disrespect hidden behind fake smiles. She endured small humiliations in silence, convincing herself that as long as Daniel was happy, nothing else mattered. Still, there were nights when she sat alone in her room, her heart heavy with worry. She wondered if Daniel truly knew the woman he was about to marry, but she did not have the heart to say anything. She feared her words would sound like bitterness or jealousy, and she did not want to cause tension between her son and his fiancée. So she remained silent, carrying her pain like a burden she alone had to bear. Daniel, meanwhile, continued to live in blissful ignorance. He spent his days expanding his business and his evenings planning the wedding with Claire. Every now and then he would notice that his mother looked tired or distant, but when he asked if she was fine, she always smiled and said yes. He believed her because he wanted to believe that his life was perfect, and so time passed. The world saw Daniel as the man who had everything. To his friends, he was a symbol of success. To the public, he was a role model. But life has a way of revealing the truth in moments when we least expect it. One ordinary afternoon, Daniel's life would change forever. He had been scheduled to travel out of town for an important meeting. His flight was canceled due to sudden weather changes, and instead of rescheduling, he decided to return home and surprise Claire and his mother. He imagined walking in with a smile, perhaps catching them sitting together, maybe even sharing tea or laughter. He thought it would be a sweet memory to hold on to. But what awaited him inside his grand home was not the sound of laughter. It was the sound of raised voices, sharp, cold, and cruel. Daniel froze as he stepped into the hallway. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining it. Then the words became clearer, cutting through the silence of the house like knives. His fiancée's voice, filled with venom, echoed from the living room. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had never heard Claire sound that way. His feet carried him forward quickly, his heart pounding as though it already knew something was terribly wrong. He turned the corner, and in that instant the perfect image of his life shattered. The sight before him was one he would never forget. Daniel stood frozen at the doorway, his hand gripping the edge of the wall as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. The sound of Claire's voice cut through the silence of the mansion, sharp and cold, words he never thought could come from the woman he was planning to marry. He had imagined coming home to surprise them, to see them together in peace, maybe even smiling. Instead, his heart pounded with every step as he moved closer, hearing the bitterness growing louder. He could make out fragments of her sentences, words that seemed laced with anger and disrespect. His chest tightened with every syllable, his mind refusing to believe that this was the same gentle voice that had once whispered love to him. When he turned the corner into the grand living room, the scene that unfolded before his eyes would burn itself into his memory forever. His mother stood clutching her cane, her frail body trembling, her face a mixture of shock and sadness. Across from her stood Claire, her face twisted in anger, her foot raised in a cruel gesture as if to strike down the woman who had given Daniel everything. The words that left Claire's lips were harsh, venomous, and filled with contempt, and Daniel's entire world seemed to collapse in that single instant. He did not move at first. It was as if time itself had stopped, and he was only a powerless spectator watching the collapse of the life he had so carefully built. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed her youth and health for him, stood defenseless against the person he had believed was his future. Daniel felt a surge of emotions rush through him. Anger, disbelief, confusion, and above all, guilt. How had he not seen this before? How had he been so blind? Claire turned, and in that moment she saw him standing there. Her expression changed almost instantly. The anger melted away into a performance of shock, and then into tears that flowed far too easily. She ran toward him, her hands reaching out, her voice breaking as she spoke his name. She tried to explain, to twist the scene into something different. She said his mother had provoked her, that she was under stress, that it had all been a misunderstanding. But Daniel's eyes, once blinded by love, were wide open now. He had seen everything with his own eyes. There was no misunderstanding. His mother, however, did not say a word. She stood in silence, her eyes filled with a sadness that pierced Daniel's heart more deeply than Claire's betrayal. She did not accuse. She did not defend herself. She simply looked at her son with a quiet dignity that broke him from within. Daniel realized then that this was not the first time. His mother's silence, her weariness, the distance he had noticed in her eyes, all of it came rushing back, and the truth hit him harder than any blow. She had endured this cruelty in silence for his sake, never wanting to tarnish his happiness. Daniel felt his knees weaken, but he forced himself to stand tall. He looked at Claire, the woman he had once believed was his partner in life, and for the first time he saw her clearly. Not the polished beauty, not the charming smile, not the carefully crafted image she presented to the world. He saw the cruelty, the selfishness, and the darkness she had tried to hide behind her elegance. And then he looked at his mother, the woman who had nothing but love to give, whose entire life had been a testament of sacrifice and resilience. His mind swirled with memories. His mother walking home late at night after long shifts. His mother sewing his clothes under the dim light. His mother encouraging him when he felt like giving up. Every moment of love, every act of selflessness, every tear she had hidden came rushing back. And here she was, facing humiliation in the very house he had promised would be her place of peace. Daniel's silence was heavy, and Claire tried again to bridge the distance. She clung to his arm, her words dripping with desperation. She said she loved him. She begged him to understand. She insisted his mother was exaggerating. But Daniel could not be swayed. His heart, though shattered, had never been clearer. He stepped away from her grasp and walked toward his mother. Slowly, he took her trembling hands into his own, lowering himself so that he could meet her eyes. For the first time in years, tears rolled down Daniel's face. He whispered words that had been long overdue, words of apology, of gratitude, of love. His mother did not blame him. She only squeezed his hands and shook her head gently, as if to tell him she had never wanted to burden him with her pain. Daniel stood again, his decision already made in his heart. Though the weight of it was crushing, he turned to Claire, his voice firm and steady. He told her that their engagement was over, that love built on lies and cruelty could not last, and that no amount of beauty or charm could hide the ugliness of a heart without compassion. Claire's face twisted in anger once again, and though she tried to argue, her words only revealed the truth even more clearly. As she stormed out of the house, Daniel felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. The life he thought he had built with her had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. It hurt to watch it crumble, but it also freed him from a future that would have destroyed everything he valued. When the door finally shut, Daniel turned back to his mother. She still looked shaken, but her eyes were filled with a quiet strength. He guided her to the couch and sat beside her, promising her that from that moment forward she would never again feel alone or mistreated in his home. He vowed to honor her sacrifices, to cherish her as the foundation of his life, and to never again let anyone come between them. That night, as Daniel sat in silence after putting his mother to rest, he reflected on the painful truth he had uncovered. He realized that wealth and success meant nothing if the people beside him did not value kindness and respect. He understood that true love could never exist without compassion, and that the greatest wealth of all was the love of a mother who had given everything without expecting anything in return. The house felt quieter, emptier, but also somehow more honest. The illusion had been broken, but in its place stood a deeper truth, a truth Daniel knew would guide the rest of his life. He had lost someone he thought was his future, but in doing so, he had rediscovered the one person who had always been his true home. And though the pain of betrayal still lingered, Daniel knew that this was not the end. It was the beginning of a life built not on appearances, but on the unshakable foundation of love, respect, and truth. Daniel woke the next morning with a heaviness in his chest that words could not explain. Sleep had been little more than a restless blur of thoughts and memories, each one cutting into him like glass, the image of Claire raising her voice at his mother, the moment when he saw her cruelty with his own eyes replayed again and again. For so long he had believed he knew her, believed he had chosen wisely, believed his future was secure. But that belief had collapsed like sand under his feet, and now he stood in the ruins of his own illusions. His mother, gentle as always, had not spoken much about what had happened. She had quietly moved about the house in the morning, brewing tea as she always did, wearing the same tired cardigan and the same smile she had worn even in the hardest days of their past. She did not complain, she did not curse Claire's name, she did not even mention it. Yet Daniel could see the weariness in her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly as she poured the tea, the way she avoided looking at him for too long. It was the silence of a woman who had endured far too much and asked for nothing in return. Daniel sat at the kitchen table watching her, guilt pressing down on him. He wondered how many times she had faced this cruelty while he was away, how many moments she had been belittled, mocked or insulted in the very house he had promised would be her haven. He felt like a failure, not as a businessman, not as a millionaire, but as a son. Money could not undo the pain his mother had endured in silence. Success could not erase the disrespect she had suffered. And love, the kind of love he thought he had with Claire, had revealed itself as nothing more than a mask hiding bitterness and greed. The day stretched on with a strange stillness. Calls came to his phone. Business matters demanded his attention, but Daniel ignored them. For the first time in years, he realized that nothing mattered more than the woman sitting across from him at that kitchen table. He thought of the boy he used to be, sitting at a cracked dining table in their tiny apartment, watching his mother count coins just to afford dinner. He remembered the way she would smile at him, telling him everything would be all right even when her eyes were tired. That smile was the same one she wore now, though the years had carved deeper lines into her face and the hardships had bent her body with age. By afternoon, Daniel made a decision. He could not let silence bury the truth any longer. He sat beside his mother, placing his hand gently over hers. She tried to pull it away, embarrassed by her trembling fingers, but he held it firmly. He asked her softly if what he had seen the night before had happened before, if Claire had treated her that way when he was not there. For a moment his mother said nothing. She looked down at her hands, her lips pressed tightly together. Daniel waited, his heart already knowing the answer. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry years of hidden pain, she nodded. She admitted that there had been words, cold remarks, little acts of cruelty that had grown worse over time. She confessed that she had kept quiet because she did not want to burden him, did not want to interfere with his happiness, did not want to see his heart broken. Daniel's chest tightened as her words sank in. He felt anger rise not at her but at himself. How blind had he been? How had he missed the signs? How had he been so willing to believe in the illusion of love that he had ignored the most important truth standing right before him? His mother's loyalty and silence had been a shield for him, but in shielding him, she had carried wounds that should never have been hers to bear. He spoke then, his voice low but firm, promising her that never again would she face such humiliation in his house. He told her that her silence had been an act of love, but it had also been his wake-up call. He could no longer pretend that everything was perfect, could no longer chase a life that looked golden on the outside but was rotting from within. His mother listened quietly, her eyes glistening with tears she rarely allowed herself to shed. She squeezed his hand, not with words of anger, but with the same gentle forgiveness she had always given him. Later that evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched across the grand living room, Daniel stood alone by the tall windows. He thought of Claire, the woman who had once seemed like the answer to all his dreams. He thought of the way she smiled when they first met, the way she spoke about their future, the way she made him believe that love and success could go hand in hand. But now those memories felt like fragments of a story that had never been real. Behind her beauty had been arrogance, behind her charm had been cruelty, and behind her promises had been nothing but lies. The cruel encounter had broken something inside him, but it had also awakened something stronger. He realized that true love could not be measured by appearances, by wealth, or by charm. True love was what his mother had given him all his life: sacrifice without complaint, loyalty without condition, and compassion even when it came at a cost. He had been searching for something he already had, and it had taken heartbreak for him to finally see it. That night, Daniel walked through his house differently. The walls, the furniture, the chandeliers that once seemed to glow with pride now felt heavy with silence. He understood now that no mansion, no luxury, no expensive ring could ever hide the emptiness left behind when respect and kindness were absent. As he passed the portraits on the wall, he wondered how many people looking in from the outside would ever know the truth of what had happened here. To the world, he was still the successful young millionaire with the perfect life. But inside, he was a man rebuilding, a son trying to honor the woman who had given him everything, a human being rediscovering what truly mattered. The cruel encounter had shaken him, but it had not destroyed him. Instead, it had stripped away the illusions, leaving behind something raw and real. Daniel knew the days ahead would not be easy. There would be whispers, questions, and perhaps even pity when the broken engagement became known. But he no longer cared about appearances. What mattered was the promise he had made to himself and to his mother, that their lives would no longer be shaped by false love and hidden cruelty, but by honesty, respect, and the unbreakable bond they shared. And so, with the night wrapping its quiet arms around the house, Daniel sat beside his mother once again, holding her hand as he had when he was a child. He whispered that no matter what the world saw or said, she was his true wealth, his greatest blessing, and his forever home. The cruel encounter had changed everything, but in its harshness it had given him clarity that nothing else could. The days after Claire left the house unfolded like a storm that had finally passed, but left broken branches scattered everywhere. Daniel moved through his mansion with a strange hollowness. The once shining rooms, the tall ceilings, and the polished floors no longer felt like symbols of success. They felt like reminders of how easily he had been deceived, how quickly a dream could turn into a nightmare when it was built on lies. His mind replayed the moment again and again. Her raised voice, her sharp eyes, her foot lifted in cruelty toward the very woman who had carried him through life. For so long he had thought he knew her, but now it was as if he had been in love with a mask that had finally fallen away to reveal what had been there all along. Claire tried to reach him in the days that followed. Messages filled his phone, her voice messages layered with tears and apologies. She spoke of stress, of misunderstandings, of how she had not meant what she said, She tried to remind him of the good times, the nights they laughed together, the plans they made for their wedding, the dreams they shared about traveling the world. But every time Daniel listened, he heard something false beneath her words. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, and no amount of sweet language could erase it. It was not stress that made someone cruel to an old woman. It was not love that lifted a foot in anger. And it was not misunderstanding that left scars on the heart of the woman who had given him everything. He did not reply. Silence was his answer, and it burned more than words ever could. Claire showed up at the gates once, dressed perfectly as always, with flowers in her hands and tears streaking down her face. She begged the guards to let her in, pleaded to speak to him just once. Daniel stood at the window watching her, his heart heavy but firm. He knew that letting her back into his life would only open the door for more cruelty, more lies, more pain. For a moment he thought of the life they had planned, the home filled with laughter and children, the perfect picture of a future he had once painted in his mind. But then he thought of his mother, sitting alone in the kitchen, her hands folded quietly in her lap, her eyes still carrying the weight of the words she had endured. That was all it took for him to turn away and let the guard send Claire back into the night. Daniel's mother remained silent through all of it. She did not speak ill of Claire, did not remind him of what had happened, did not celebrate that she was gone. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity she always had. When Daniel apologized again for what she had endured, she only shook her head and said softly that her only wish was for him to be happy. That single sentence cut through him like nothing else could. His mother, who had faced humiliation in her own home, still thought only of his happiness. Her selflessness shamed him, but it also gave him strength. One evening, Daniel sat with her in the garden, the soft breeze carrying the scent of roses. He asked her why she had stayed quiet for so long, why she had let herself be treated so poorly without telling him. She smiled faintly, her eyes gazing at the horizon as if searching the past for answers. She told him that a mother's heart is made for sacrifice, that sometimes silence feels easier than breaking the dreams of a child. She admitted that she had seen Claire's mask slipping many times, but she had hoped Daniel would see it for himself when the time was right. And though it hurt her deeply, she had chosen to carry that pain so he could live with the illusion of happiness a little longer. Her words made Daniel realize the depth of her love. It was not the kind of love that demanded recognition or praise. It was the kind of love that endured quietly, that suffered in silence, that gave without ever expecting anything in return. He looked at her then not only as his mother, but as the strongest person he had ever known. In her fragile frame was a strength greater than all his wealth, all his success, all his achievements. The mask had fallen away from Claire, but in that fall, Daniel had discovered something else, what true strength and love looked like. He began to see his life with new eyes. He thought about the people he surrounded himself with, the friends who only called when they needed something, the acquaintances who praised him when the cameras were on but disappeared when the lights dimmed. He realized how much of his world had been built on appearances, how many masks he had mistaken for faces. Slowly, Daniel began to change the way he lived. He spent less time at grand parties and more time sitting with his mother over simple dinners. He stopped chasing the empty praise of strangers and started investing his energy in real conversations, real connections, real people who cared about him beyond his wealth. He cut ties with those who drained him and drew closer to those who brought peace into his life. It was not an easy transition. The world outside still expected him to show up as the flawless millionaire with the perfect life. There were rumors about why the engagement had ended, whispers that Claire herself spread in her desperation to protect her image. Some said Daniel had been cruel, others claimed his mother had been jealous, and still others painted Claire as a victim of misunderstanding. Daniel heard the whispers, but he no longer cared. The truth was clear in his heart, and that truth mattered more than the stories people told. Through it all, his mother remained his anchor. Each morning she would greet him with the same gentle smile she had given him as a boy. The smile that reminded him that no matter how dark the world outside became, he was never truly alone. And each evening, Daniel found comfort in the quiet presence of the woman who had given him everything without asking for anything in return. The mask that had once blinded him had fallen, and though the truth was painful, it also set him free. Daniel no longer searched for happiness in appearances or in the approval of others. He found it in the simple act of sitting beside his mother, in the peace of knowing that the love he had been looking for had been beside him all along, And as he looked ahead to the future, he knew that no matter what challenges lay before him, he would face them with open eyes. He had learned to see beyond the masks, beyond the polished surfaces, and into the hearts of those around him. The cruel encounter had torn his illusions apart, but in their place it had given him a new vision of what truly mattered. The house felt different now. Quieter, calmer, but also heavy with unspoken truths. Daniel often found himself pausing in the middle of a room, staring at the space around him, remembering how he once believed everything was perfect. His mind wandered back to the laughter he thought was real, the warmth he thought was genuine, and the future he thought he was building. It was painful to admit, but all of it had been an illusion. Yet even in the wreckage of his broken engagement, one thing shone brighter than ever before: the unwavering presence of his mother. She was the constant thread in his life, the person who had stood beside him through every storm. Even now, after enduring cruelty and humiliation in her own son's home, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She did not complain, she did not fill the air with bitterness, she did not ask for pity. Instead, she smiled at him each morning as though nothing had happened, as though her only concern was his well-being. That silence, that refusal to place her pain on his shoulders, was what broke Daniel the most. One evening, as he returned from a long day at his office, Daniel found his mother sitting in the garden under the fading sunlight. She was gazing at the roses she had planted months ago, her cane resting against the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sight moved him deeply. He walked over, sat beside her, and after a long silence, he asked her why she had never told him the truth about Claire's behavior. His voice was soft but carried the weight of regret. She turned to him with eyes that held decades of strength and sacrifice. She told him that a mother's duty was not only to protect her child from harm, but also from heartbreak. She admitted that she had seen Claire's unkindness long before he had, but she had chosen to remain silent because she wanted him to hold on to his happiness for as long as possible. She had hoped perhaps that love might change Claire, that time might soften her heart, or that Daniel might one day see the truth himself. Her words struck him like a stone. He felt guilt gnawing at him, guilt for being blind, for letting his mother carry such pain, for building a life that had allowed someone else's cruelty to touch her. But she smiled faintly, reaching over to place her frail hand over his. She said she did not regret her silence because she had seen how happy he was, and for her that was enough. She reminded him that her love had always been about sacrifice, that her joy had always come from his joy, and that she needed nothing more than to see him fulfilled. Daniel sat there in stunned silence, tears welling in his eyes. He realized then that his mother's strength was not loud or forceful. It was quiet, invisible, and enduring. It was the strength of someone who bore pain so that others did not have to. The strength of someone who chose love even when it cost her comfort. The strength of someone who gave without asking anything in return. The moment left Daniel reflecting deeply on the meaning of wealth. He had worked so hard to build an empire, to achieve success, to stand on top of the world. But sitting there beside his mother, he realized none of it mattered without compassion, without respect, without love. True wealth was not in the mansion he owned or the cars he drove. It was in the bond he shared with the woman who had carried him through poverty, who had sacrificed her life for his future, who had stood quietly even when others tried to push her down. Over the next few weeks, Daniel made changes to his life. He began spending more time with his mother, listening to her stories, cherishing the memories of their past, and creating new ones. He took her to places she had never seen before, places she had once only dreamed of but never thought she would reach. They traveled together, not as a millionaire and his dependent, but as a son and the mother who had given him everything. Everywhere they went, Daniel found himself watching her expressions closely. The way her eyes lit up when she saw something new, the way her laughter bubbled up when she felt free, the way her hand squeezed his when she was proud of him. These small moments became his true treasures. They filled the emptiness left behind by the broken engagement and replaced it with something far more meaningful. There were still nights when Daniel thought of Claire. The memories of betrayal did not vanish easily, but every time he felt bitterness creep in, he looked at his mother and reminded himself that her love had never failed him. He realized that he had been chasing something he already had. The loyalty, the devotion, the care he sought in a partner had always been right there in his mother's silent strength. One afternoon, as they shared tea by the window, His mother told him something he would never forget. She said that life will always test you, that people will come and go, that betrayal and heartbreak are part of the journey. But what truly matters is how you rise from those moments, how you protect the goodness in your heart, and how you choose to move forward without letting bitterness consume you. She told him that the cruel things Claire had done were not the end of the story, but rather a lesson written into his path so that he could learn to value what was real. Daniel felt those words carve themselves into his soul. He realized that his mother had not only been his protector, but also his greatest teacher. Her wisdom came not from books or wealth, but from years of sacrifice, from pain endured in silence, from love given freely. And for the first time, Daniel truly understood the depth of her resilience. As days turned into weeks, Daniel grew stronger. He no longer saw himself as the man who had been deceived, but as the man who had been given a second chance to rebuild his life with clarity. He knew that one day he might find love again, but it would not be with someone wearing a mask. It would be with someone who valued the same truths his mother had taught him: kindness, respect, loyalty, and compassion. Until then, he was content. He had all he needed in the bond that had carried him through every storm. The world outside still whispered. Stories spread. Rumors grew. People speculated about why the engagement had ended. But Daniel no longer cared about their opinions. He had seen what mattered, and he would never trade it again for appearances or illusions. He had chosen to honor the silent strength of the woman who had given him life, and in doing so he had discovered his own. That night, as he stood by the window watching the moonlight spill across the garden, Daniel felt a peace he had not felt in years. The betrayal still hurt, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was the love of his mother, the lessons of resilience she had given him, and the strength to build a future rooted in truth. And in that quiet moment, he whispered to himself that no wealth, no success, and no relationship would ever again matter more than the silent strength of the woman who had always been his greatest treasure. Daniel woke one morning with the weight of clarity pressing firmly on his chest. For weeks he had replayed the past over and over, questioning his choices, drowning himself in guilt and wondering what could have been different. But there came a day when he realized that staying stuck in regret would not change anything. His mother's soft words, her patience, her silence, and her endurance had all led him to one truth. He had to decide the direction of his life now. Not tomorrow, not someday, but today. The broken engagement had left him scarred, but in those scars he had found his real compass. He knew he could not allow himself to remain chained to the memory of someone who wore a mask. Claire had tried again and again to reach him, her words painted with promises and regrets. But Daniel had learned how to see beyond words. Love was not in grand gestures or perfect smiles. Love was in respect, in kindness, in the small quiet acts that showed care when no one else was watching. He had watched Claire betray that truth with his own eyes, and no apology could mend what she had broken. His decision came during a conversation with his mother one afternoon. They sat together in the living room, a soft light spilling across the carpet as she stitched a small tear in her shawl. She had done it so many times before, mending what was broken with patience and care. Daniel watched her hands move with steady rhythm, and it struck him that this was what she had done all his life. She had mended his broken shoes, patched his torn clothes, fixed his fears with gentle words, and healed his wounded heart with her love. Watching her, he realized he had been given everything he needed to make his choice. He told her then, in a quiet but certain voice, that he was ending all ties with Claire. He was not just ending the engagement. He was closing the door completely. There would be no going back, no second chances, no lingering hopes. His future would not be built with someone who had no respect for the woman who meant the most to him. His mother looked at him with soft eyes as if she had been waiting for him to say those words all along. She smiled faintly and said she only wanted him to choose what gave him peace. But Daniel did not stop there. He had another decision burning in his heart. He told his mother that from that day forward, his life would no longer be consumed by appearances or by the chase for approval. He would no longer measure his worth by what others thought of him or by the luxury around him. He had worked for years to build an empire. But what use was an empire if it left the person he loved most vulnerable? He wanted his future to look different. He wanted to build not just a business but a life centered on truth, compassion, and respect. His mother listened, her hands still busy stitching, and when she finished, She placed the needle down and touched his hand. She told him she had always known he was capable of such strength. She reminded him that true greatness was not in money but in the way a man treated those who depended on him. She said that his decision was not only about ending an engagement, but about reclaiming his soul. Those words stayed with him. That evening, Daniel began to act on his choice. He called Claire for the last time, his voice steady and calm, and told her it was over. He told her that no explanation, no plea, and no excuse could erase the truth he had seen with his own eyes. He thanked her for the memories they had shared, but made it clear that their paths were now separate. She argued, cried, and threatened to expose him, but Daniel did not waver. He hung up, and for the first time since the night of betrayal, he felt free. The next day, he went to his office and made changes. He reduced his schedule, delegated responsibilities, and gave himself the space to breathe. He had spent so long buried in work that he had forgotten to live, forgotten to enjoy the small things, forgotten the value of time. Now he wanted to reclaim that time and spend it with his mother. He began bringing her to the office, letting her see the company she had indirectly built through her sacrifices. He introduced her to his employees with pride, calling her the reason behind his success. The look in her eyes when she heard those words was something Daniel would never forget. His decision also reshaped the way he viewed relationships. He no longer sought approval in glamorous parties or elegant gatherings. He no longer wanted to surround himself with people who only valued him for his wealth. Instead, he searched for genuine connections. He reconnected with old friends, visited places from his past, and reminded himself of where he came from. He found joy in simplicity again, something he had lost in the pursuit of perfection. Through it all, his mother remained at the center. She was not just a part of his home. She was the heart of it. Daniel realized that honoring her was not only about caring for her physically, but also about carrying her lessons into the future. Her silent strength had shaped him, and now it was his turn to honor that strength with his decisions. As weeks passed, Daniel began to feel lighter. The mansion no longer felt like a cage. It became a place of warmth again, filled with quiet dinners, laughter, and conversations that mattered. He watched his mother's face soften as she finally felt at peace in her own home. The shadow of Claire no longer haunted their lives. What remained was a bond unbroken, a love that could not be shaken by betrayal. One night, as Daniel stood in the garden looking at the stars, his mother joined him. She leaned on her cane but smiled at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. She told him she was proud, not because of his wealth or success, but because of the man he had become. She said his decision had shown her that he was no longer the boy she had raised, but the man she had always hoped he would be. That moment filled Daniel with a pride he had never known before. The decision that changed everything was not just about ending an engagement. It was about choosing truth over illusion, respect over appearances, and love over convenience. It was about finally seeing clearly, about refusing to let the masks of others define his life, and about building a future rooted in the strength of what was real. Daniel knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it with open eyes and a steady heart. And as his mother squeezed his hand gently, he realized that no matter what the world threw his way, he would never again lose sight of the lesson her silent strength had taught him. His life had been redirected, his heart renewed, and his soul unburdened. The decision had cost him what he once thought was love, but it had given him something far greater, the chance to live a life built on truth, honor, and the kind of love that never fails. The weeks turned into months, and slowly the sharp wound in Daniel's heart began to heal. He no longer woke up each morning with bitterness in his chest, no longer replayed the betrayal over and over in his mind. Instead, he found himself looking at life through a new lens, one that had been shaped by pain but polished by truth. For years he had believed wealth meant success, luxury, recognition, and admiration from the world. He had measured his worth in the cars he drove, the house he lived in, and the partner he stood beside. But after everything had fallen apart, he discovered a deeper meaning of wealth, one that had nothing to do with what could be counted in money or displayed on magazine covers. It was a wealth built on love, respect, loyalty, and compassion, the kind of wealth that his mother had been giving him all along. Daniel's days became simpler, but more fulfilling. He no longer filled his schedule with endless meetings or social events. Instead, he carved out time for the moments that mattered. Breakfast with his mother in the garden became a ritual, where they shared not only food but also memories. She would tell him stories from his childhood, stories he had forgotten or never even known, stories about the sacrifices she made silently while he slept as a boy, never realizing the battles she fought alone. He listened with tears in his eyes, realizing that every success he had achieved carried her fingerprints. Every late night she had worked, every meal she had skipped, every encouraging word she had spoken had been the foundation upon which his life was built. It humbled him. For all the public praise he had received as a self-made man, Daniel knew the truth. He was not self-made. He was mother-made, and that realization became the cornerstone of how he wanted to live the rest of his life. One afternoon, Daniel sat with his mother on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The world below bustled with noise, ambition, and competition, but up there it was quiet. He asked her what happiness meant to her, what she had dreamed of when she was younger. She looked at him with gentle eyes and said, "Happiness was never about riches or recognition. It was about peace, about knowing that the people you love are safe, about going to sleep at night without bitterness in your heart." She told him she had lived her dreams through him, watching him rise, watching him succeed, watching him become the man he was meant to be. That was enough for her. Her words stayed with Daniel long after the conversation ended. He began to see how often people chased happiness in the wrong places. They looked for it in wealth, in status, in admiration, but overlooked the quiet blessings that were already present in their lives. He realized he had done the same, chasing a vision of love that looked perfect on the outside but was empty on the inside. He had mistaken charm for kindness, beauty for compassion, and appearances for truth. It had cost him dearly, but it had also given him the wisdom to see clearly. He began investing his time and resources differently. Instead of throwing lavish parties or competing with others in displays of wealth, he funded community projects in honor of his mother. He built shelters for single mothers, remembering the struggles she had endured alone. He sponsored education for children from poor families, remembering the nights when his mother had sat with him under a flickering lamp, making sure he never gave up on school, even when times were hard. Each act of giving felt like a repayment of a debt he could never fully settle, but one he was honored to spend his life trying. His mother watched quietly, her pride visible in the way her eyes glistened when she saw what he was doing. She never asked for recognition, never demanded that he give back. But Daniel could see her joy in the way she carried herself. For her, his choices were not about the projects or the buildings or the donations. They were about the fact that her son had not let bitterness harden his heart. He had chosen goodness, and that was her true reward. Sometimes at night, Daniel still thought of Claire. He wondered if she had changed, if she had ever looked back and realized what she had lost. But those thoughts no longer carried pain. They were just passing reflections, reminders of the lessons he had learned. He did not hate her. In fact, he felt a strange gratitude. If not for her betrayal, he might never have seen the truth about what really mattered. Her cruelty had been the fire that burned away the illusions, leaving only what was pure and real. The people around him noticed the change. Friends who once admired him for his wealth now admired him for his humility. Strangers who once saw him as untouchable now saw him as approachable. Employees who once feared him now respected him not only as a leader, but as a human being. His life, once centered on appearances, now radiated authenticity, and through it all his mother remained at the center. Every decision, every choice, every path he took was anchored by the lessons she had taught him, not through lectures or demands, but through the quiet power of her example. Her silent strength had been his foundation, her sacrifices his stepping stones, her love his guiding light. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Daniel turned to her and said something he had carried in his heart for years. He told her she was his true wealth, his greatest treasure, and his eternal blessing. He said no amount of money, no success, no relationship could ever compare to what she had given him. His mother smiled, her eyes soft, and whispered that all she had ever wanted was to see him live with a good heart. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he thought about how far he had come. He had lost what he once thought was everything, but in losing it, he had gained a truth far greater. He had learned that true wealth is not counted in dollars or displayed in mansions. It is counted in the love we give, the respect we show, the kindness we share, and the people who stand by us when the world grows cold. The betrayal had once felt like the end of his story, but now he saw it differently. It had been the turning point, the painful moment that forced him to open his eyes and rebuild his life on stronger foundations. And as he drifted into sleep, he felt a peace that money could never buy, the peace of knowing he was living in truth, honoring the woman who had given him everything, and carrying forward the lesson she had etched into his soul. Daniel understood now, more than ever before, that the greatest success in life is not becoming a millionaire. It is becoming a person who loves deeply, respects sincerely, and stands firmly in truth. And that was a lesson he would carry with him forever.